You save up. You wrench on it. You finally ride it like it's yours forever. Then one morning, it's banned. 12 states. No warning, no explanation, just gone. Watch until the end, because the truth behind this is something every rider needs to hear. What's happening? One morning, riders across 12 U.S. states woke up to a message they never expected. The Kawasaki H2750 was no longer street legal. It wasn't a voluntary recall. It wasn't a technical service bulletin. It was a ban, swift, sweeping, and total. Thousands of owners suddenly found themselves holding titles to bikes they couldn't register, ride, or sell. The decision hit with zero public warning. State DMVs flagged the model as pending enforcement. Local police departments issued bulletins advising officers not to allow H2750s on roads. In California, one rider was pulled over during his commute, his bike impounded on the spot. He hadn't broken the speed limit. The officer showed him the bulletin and shook his head. "It's not your fault," he said, "but this one's grounded." The ban spread was rapid. Illinois and New York were the first to issue public orders. Then came Oregon, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and 7 more. State legislators cited emerging safety concerns, though specifics were vague. The language was clinical, terms like powertrain instability and unpredictable throttle response. But for riders, it was personal. They had lost something they trusted. By the time dealerships received notice, they had already begun refusing service. Insurance agencies updated policies, dropping H2750 coverage without explanation. Forums exploded with confusion. No one had seen it coming. One post read, "I just rode mine yesterday. Now it's contraband?" 12 states, thousands of machines, and a silence from Kawasaki that made everything worse. But what could have forced regulators to act so fast? That answer wasn't political. It was mechanical. If this has already hit a nerve, or if you've ever owned a bike you loved, hit like so more riders see this before it's too late. And drop a comment below. Do you think Kawasaki should be held responsible, or is this just the cost of performance? Why did regulators snap overnight? The bans didn't unfold gradually. They hit like a wave. 12 states enacting restrictions within just 16 days. To outsiders, it seemed reactionary. To insiders, it was overdue. The dominoes had been set months earlier, and the final piece came in the form of a single accident report out of Colorado that regulators couldn't ignore. That report documented an H2750 veering off a straight highway stretch under clear weather and normal traffic conditions. No oil, no ice, no other vehicles involved, just a sudden engine surge, a locked rear wheel, and a rider sent tumbling 70 feet across asphalt. He survived, but barely. When investigators pulled ECU logs, they found anomalies, uncommanded throttle inputs, a brief sensor spike, and then nothing. Power dropped completely. The data couldn't be explained, but it wasn't the first time. Several states had received informal warnings from traffic safety labs noting inconsistencies in digital throttle behavior tied to the model. Internal emails from Illinois' Vehicle Safety Board showed mounting concern. One thread read, "Multiple unexplained power losses, recommend temporary operational halt." Another, "Awaiting federal signal, but this is getting dangerous." Still, no formal action was taken, until Colorado. After the crash, state regulators initiated an emergency convening. Within 48 hours, they issued an immediate suspension on H2750 road use. Neighboring states followed. By the end of the second week, the ban stretched coast to coast, from Washington to Massachusetts. There was no time left for debate. Safety, they argued, could no longer wait for a press cycle or a corporate memo. And the machine at the center of it all? It wasn't just fast, it was unforgettable. If your bike still runs, make sure your gear does too. We've linked our top road-tested helmets, gloves, and tools in the description. No junk, just the stuff that lasts. The legend on 2 wheels, Kawasaki H2750 revealed. The Kawasaki H2750 wasn't built for beginners, it was built for dominance. A descendant of the infamous two-stroke Mach 4 of the 70s, the modern H2750 carried the name into a new era with supercharged precision and unapologetic aggression. It wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a statement, a machine that dared the rider to keep up. At its core, the H2750 featured a supercharged inline-4 engine pushing over 200 horsepower. Paired with a lightweight trellis frame and aerodynamic winglets, it offered stability at speeds that blurred the line between road and racetrack. Riders spoke of it with awe. Mechanics treated it like a ritual. Every bolt, every sensor, every throttle input demanded respect. But what truly set the H2750 apart was how it fused raw power with digital finesse. With IMU-controlled traction systems, advanced launch control, and cornering ABS, the bike promised control under pressure until it didn't. That's where the trouble began. The same systems meant to protect the rider started showing cracks. Riders reported strange surges, hesitation under load, and momentary blackouts in throttle response. What had once been praised as cutting edge began to feel unpredictable. Yet to many owners, that unpredictability was part of the thrill. They didn't just buy a bike, they bought legacy, power, identity. But as the bans rolled in, it became clear this icon had become a liability. Not just to regulators, but to the very people who once worshipped it. And the numbers behind those failures? They were about to hit hard. Pins torn out on the freeway. It started with scattered reports, riders losing control during high-speed merges, throttle spikes mid-corner, brakes fading without warning. At first, the stories were brushed off. Human error, bad weather, poor maintenance. But then came the pattern, and then came the crashes. In Nevada, a 34-year-old H2750 owner was thrown into a guardrail after the rear tire locked during a lane change. He survived with spinal fractures and a shattered wrist. In Tennessee, a husband and wife riding together on a two-up configuration were ejected after the ECU cut power mid-turn. She didn't make it. Her name was Jenna. She was 29. The crash reports weren't just emotional, they were measurable. Data logs from onboard recorders showed inconsistent torque readings, throttle anomalies, and power delivery gaps. Experts called it electronic instability under real-world loads. The term spread across tech forums. One mechanic wrote, "It's like the bike gets confused when it's pushed too hard, then it panics." For a machine built to be pushed, that was catastrophic. Emergency rooms took notice. A New Jersey trauma nurse recalled seeing 3 H2-related incidents in a single week. Orthopedic surgeons described repeat fracture patterns, the kind seen in high-speed ejections, not low-side spills. Lawyers began cataloging it all, preparing exhibits for cases they knew were coming. And as the body count grew, so did the outrage, because this wasn't a recall. It was a warning, and it came far too late. They didn't just lose money, they lost something deeper. The economic damage was instant. The Kawasaki H2750 went from prized icon to pariah overnight. Listings vanished from major platforms. Ads were flagged or rejected. One Texas rider dropped his asking price from $15,000 to $11,000 and still got no offers. Dealerships refused trade-ins. Warranty support evaporated. Riders called service desks and were told, "We're not allowed to touch that model anymore." Insurance companies followed fast. Policyholders in affected states received cancellation letters or saw premiums spike. One Pennsylvania owner was told to submit a certified mechanic's report just to keep coverage. Riders weren't just watching value disappear, they were being priced out of their machines. But what hurt more wasn't financial, it was personal. The H2750 wasn't just a bike, it was culture, identity, pride. In Michigan, a retired firefighter named Carlos kept his pristine. "It was my ritual," he said. "Now it just sits like a crime scene." In Utah, a father and son who'd rebuilt one together couldn't even ride it legally. Online forums turned bitter. Comments read like breakup letters. "We carried the brand, they let us fall." Some peeled off decals. Others vowed never to buy Kawasaki again. They didn't just lose resale value, they lost their community. And Kawasaki? Still no statement. No refund, no explanation. But the silence wouldn't last forever. Something was already leaking from the inside. Kawasaki's PR blackout. In the critical days following the ban, Kawasaki's public relations team said nothing. Not a tweet, not a press release, not a single public acknowledgement. For a company with millions in brand equity and decades of rider trust, the silence was deafening. While social media exploded with questions, local dealerships confirmed they had received no guidance, no service protocols, no warranty directions. Corporate remained behind the curtain. Industry analysts were stunned. A product suddenly outlawed in 12 states, and the manufacturer refused to face the public. Even automotive journalists struggled to get comments. One emailed Kawasaki's North America media line 5 times in 3 days. No reply. An editor from a major motorcycle magazine was told, "We're waiting on Tokyo." But Tokyo never spoke. Behind the scenes, some Kawasaki staffers privately said they were told to hold position until legal reviewed options. In one dealership memo, a regional manager advised reps not to use the term recall under any circumstance. This wasn't crisis management, it was abandonment. In the absence of clarity, chaos took over. Misinformation spread like wildfire. Some claimed the H2750 would be crushed at ports. Others suggested it was tied to emissions fraud. Owners had no idea what was real. In the vacuum, lawsuits began to form. Riders weren't just upset, they were organizing. Because while Kawasaki stayed silent, someone inside the company finally decided to speak. And what they had to share would turn the entire narrative on its head. Whistle to war drums. The first leak came as a photo, blurry, low resolution, and anonymously uploaded to a rider forum. It showed a service bulletin dated 5 months before the bans. The document, marked internal only, warned of possible ECU instability during temperature fluctuations. It referenced field incidents involving unexpected power modulation. That bulletin never reached customers, but for the riders who saw it, it confirmed what many suspected. Kawasaki knew. Then came the emails. Leaked by a former engineering contractor in New Jersey, they revealed internal concerns about the H2750's powertrain logic under voltage stress. One engineer wrote, "We're not getting consistent behavior under high torque shift scenarios. If this happens mid-lane, it's not recoverable." Another showed legal and compliance teams discussing a delay in documentation updates. The reason? Avoid fueling unnecessary concern during the spring launch window. This wasn't just a technical failure, it was suppression. The leak broke containment. Motorcycle media picked it up. Tech analysts dissected every line. A major rider YouTuber dropped a 40-minute video calling it the biggest betrayal of trust in modern motorcycle history. Riders who had felt isolated now had direction. They weren't just angry, they were united. This wasn't about defects anymore, it was about deception. And while Kawasaki tried to hold the line, regulators, lawyers, and even ex-employees were already circling. And the next wave coming? It wasn't emotional. It was legal. Class action fired up in Illinois. It began quietly with a few frustrated owners emailing attorneys in the Chicago area. But within 2 weeks of the first state bans, a formal class action lawsuit was filed in the Northern District of Illinois. The lead plaintiffs were a coalition of riders from Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio, each having purchased a Kawasaki H2750 within the past 2 years, now stuck with bikes they could neither ride nor sell. The claim? Fraud, negligence, and failure to disclose known defects that endangered consumers and violated warranty protections. The suit, filed by a firm with a track record against auto manufacturers, demanded compensation for depreciation, loss of use, and punitive damages. But it went further. The plaintiffs also called for a forced buyback, arguing Kawasaki must repurchase every H2750 sold in the 12 banned states at full retail value. Their case leaned heavily on leaked documents, emails, and bulletins suggesting engineers flagged issues long before the bans. As news of the filing spread, riders in other states began organizing. A second lawsuit formed in New Jersey. Another legal team launched efforts in California. Collectively, they represented over 1,000 owners. Some analysts estimated that if successful, the cases could cost Kawasaki more than $300 million in damages and legal fees, not including reputational fallout or market loss. The legal fire had been lit, and it was spreading. But Kawasaki wasn't planning to settle quietly. Their defense would come fast and hit hard. Kawasaki's counterstrike. Kawasaki's legal strategy was aggressive, calculated, and backed by decades of experience. Within a week of the Illinois filing, the company submitted its formal response, denying every major allegation. At the center of their argument was rider error. The H2750, they claimed, was powerful but not defective, designed for experienced users, not casual weekend riders. They pointed to disclaimers in owner manuals and sales contracts stating the H2750 was a high-performance machine requiring advanced skill. Kawasaki emphasized aftermarket tuning, arguing many incidents involved altered ECUs, third-party exhaust, or modified throttle maps. Once a bike had been changed, even slightly, the company argued it couldn't be held accountable. To reinforce their position, they brought in expert witnesses from the racing industry who testified the bike was dangerous in the wrong hands, but not flawed. One consultant compared it to a racehorse, powerful, unpredictable, and never intended for beginners. Kawasaki also argued that leaked emails were taken out of context. Engineering concerns, they said, didn't equal design flaws. Legal called it standard internal debate. Their position was clear. They didn't ignore a defect. They sold a machine that demanded respect. And if someone got hurt, the blame wasn't theirs. But in the court of public opinion, that argument was losing ground fast. Because even as Kawasaki defended itself on paper, the public wanted to know who let this happen in the first place and why the system let it slide for so long. Federal safety nets collapse. By the time lawsuits were underway, lawmakers and journalists began peeling back another layer of the disaster: the failure of federal oversight. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, long viewed as the gold standard of consumer safety enforcement, admitted in a press briefing it had received multiple complaints about the Kawasaki H2750 stretching back 9 months. But instead of launching a formal investigation, the agency labeled those reports as isolated incidents and filed them under general rider feedback. It wasn't just the NHTSA. Internal memos from state transportation boards showed conflict between local engineers who raised red flags and agency directors reluctant to challenge a global manufacturer without federal backing. One document from Washington State revealed a senior analyst writing, "Without a clear signal from NHTSA, we can't initiate action without exposing the state to legal retaliation." No one wanted to make the first move. Part of the problem, analysts said, was Kawasaki's regulatory status. As a global brand with limited H2750 production, the model had received exemptions during emissions and performance reviews. Those carve-outs, originally meant for boutique or low-volume vehicles, ended up bypassing key safety assessments entirely. Congress started making noise. A group of senators introduced a proposal to reevaluate NHTSA's exemption process and subpoena communications tied to the H2750's oversight. One lawmaker from California called it a textbook case of regulatory paralysis. The system meant to protect riders had failed. And while politicians scrambled to assign blame, riders were already moving without them, taking matters into their own hands, off the record and off the grid. Underground rides and ciphered parts. When the bans hit and the lawsuits mounted, a strange new subculture emerged, one that defied the legal system entirely. Across the country, Kawasaki H2750 owners began forming encrypted group chats, invite-only forums, and underground garage circles with one mission: keep riding no matter what the law said. It wasn't just rebellion, it was survival. In upstate New York, a mechanic known only as Ghostpin began offering stealth modifications, ECU resets mimicking legal models, hidden VN tweaks, and muffler kits that passed emissions sniffers. He wasn't alone. In Arizona, riders organized ghost rides, late-night runs through restricted roads. Helmets carried GoPros, license plates were swapped or obscured. Some bikes were rigged with kill switches in case law enforcement got too close. Parts turned into black market currency. One rider in California traded a rare fairing panel for a brake modulator at a neutral drop site in Nevada. No invoices, no shipping, just trust, screenshots, and burner emails. Owners printed QR code stickers linking to encrypted safety manuals and tuning advice. It was a world detached from Kawasaki, from regulators, from legality. This wasn't a club, it was a movement. They called themselves the Last Riders. Their motto, if they won't fix it, we'll keep it alive. But the line between rebellion and recklessness was already starting to blur. And as the underground expanded, new questions surfaced about safety, accountability, and what could happen if the wrong rider took the wrong machine onto the wrong road. Because this wasn't about passion anymore. It was about control. And that control was slipping fast. Other manufacturers scrambled. The shockwaves from the Kawasaki H2750 ban didn't stop at Kawasaki. Within 2 weeks of the first state-level crackdowns, rival manufacturers were already reviewing their own product lines, worried the regulatory spotlight might turn on them next. Yamaha initiated a full internal audit of its high-performance segment, including the MT-10 and R1 series. Ducati froze the North American release of its next-gen Street Fighter model. Even Harley-Davidson, not typically known for hypersport risk, instructed dealerships to halt test rides on its Livewire electric platform until further diagnostics were completed. Executives scrambled behind closed doors. A leaked memo from a regional Yamaha office mentioned strategic containment procedures and product messaging recalibration. In plain language, avoid attention. Manufacturers were desperate to avoid the kind of scrutiny that had shattered Kawasaki's credibility. One Ducati safety engineer, speaking off the record, admitted, "We're all reviewing throttle response logs. If anything looks remotely like the H2 behavior, it's getting pulled." Supply chains slowed. Marketing campaigns were shelved. Regional reps canceled dealer tours. What began as a crisis for one brand had now become a sector-wide credibility threat. While manufacturers worked to contain risk behind the scenes, the U.S. government decided it was time to take the spotlight. Because if the companies wouldn't come forward, Congress would drag them in. Capitol Hill calls for a hearing. It began with a statement, sharp, scathing, and aimed directly at Kawasaki. Senator Maria Dorsey of California, a longtime transportation safety advocate, held a press conference on the Capitol steps. Flanked by staffers and crash survivors, she declared, "This is not about speed. This is about silence. And when manufacturers refuse to protect riders, the government must act." Within 48 hours, a formal congressional hearing was announced. The House Subcommittee on Transportation and Motor Vehicles issued subpoenas to Kawasaki executives, demanding documents related to H2750 testing, complaints, and customer protocols. The hearings were scheduled for early summer and would be broadcast nationally. Headlines exploded. Congress targets big bikes. H2 fallout goes federal. Lawmakers versus speed machines. The media turned the scandal into primetime drama. During preliminary testimony, regulators admitted they had been slow to respond to early signs. NHTSA officials faced tough questions about why complaints were ignored and why state agencies had to act alone. One congressman asked whether there were industry relationships clouding the objectivity of the agency. The implication was clear: someone had been protecting Kawasaki or looking the other way. Consumer advocacy groups seized the moment. They pushed for new laws requiring real-time diagnostic data, mandatory recall flags, and tighter emissions loophole closures. Meanwhile, motorcycle industry lobbyists worked overtime to soften the blow, but the damage was done. The public saw a broken system. And for the workers still building H2 units overseas, it wasn't just broken. It was collapsing. Union anger and supply chain strikes. While lawmakers debated in D.C., unrest spread through Kawasaki's global workforce. In Lincoln, Nebraska, home to Kawasaki's largest U.S. manufacturing facility, workers began organizing unofficial walkouts. The union representing assembly line technicians demanded an emergency meeting with corporate leadership. Their grievance was simple: job security. The H2 series was a flagship product. With bans, lawsuits, and investigations stacking up, workers feared layoffs were imminent. Across the Pacific, tensions flared at Kawasaki's Akashi plant in Japan. Subcontractors reported abrupt production halts and parts delays. Truck drivers, welders, and QA teams were told to stand by until further notice. Rumors of furloughs spread quickly. Inside break rooms, frustration turned to fury. Workers blamed executives for ignoring early warnings and letting a time bomb hit the market. One technician who had worked on the H2 program since its revival said anonymously, "They made us believe we were building something legendary. Now it's a joke, and they won't even face us." Strikes began rippling through suppliers. A brake component manufacturer in Malaysia halted exports. A German electronics vendor paused shipments to Kawasaki's European plant. The global supply chain, already fragile post-pandemic, strained under mistrust and backlash. The union's message was blunt: protect our jobs or we stop the lines. And with consumer confidence evaporating, the stakes grew higher by the hour. Because while the factories rattled, so did the markets. This story's not over. And if you want to be the first to see where it goes next, subscribe now. Because what happened to the H2 750? It might just be the opening act. Consumers and investors on edge. Wall Street didn't shrug this one off. Within days of the 12-state ban, Kawasaki stock slid sharply, erasing nearly $700 million in market value. Analysts downgraded the company's outlook, citing reputational damage, legal exposure, and uncertainty around future performance models. Investors who once saw the H2 750 as a flagship asset now viewed it as a legal landmine. Insurance carriers scrambled. Multiple firms began reclassifying all performance motorcycles in the same tier as the H2 750. Premiums rose across the board, sometimes by double digits, especially in states with active class action suits. For owners of other models, the message was clear: guilt by association. One Chicago rider said his broker asked if he planned to race, simply because his bike shared a Kawasaki badge. Meanwhile, rival manufacturers pounced. EV motorcycle startups like Zero and Verge Motors capitalized on the moment, flooding digital ad space with messages like clean, legal, untouchable. Ducati and Yamaha rolled out safety audit campaigns, spotlighting their own engineering transparency and public recall history. One Harley-Davidson spokesperson even remarked, "We may be loud, but we're predictable." But beneath the surface, a deeper shift had begun. For decades, riders accepted risk as part of the ride. Now, the risk wasn't just physical, it was financial. Buy the wrong bike, and your investment could evaporate overnight. It wasn't about horsepower anymore. It was about stability, trust, and knowing someone would take your call if something went wrong. Because this wasn't the last ban, it was the first. They said it was just a motorcycle. But what just happened to the H2 750 proves it's never just about the machine. It's about control. It's about silence. It's about who gets to decide what freedom on the road really means. And if you think that was outrageous, wait until you see the bikes people are still buying in 2025, even though there are financial disasters waiting to happen. Tap into the next chapter and see the 16 models smart riders are already avoiding. Watch now and ride smarter. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're done falling for the industry's bait.